Hello everyone and welcome to COM 350. This lecture would be incredibly long if I did it all at once. So I'm going to do it in pieces. And essentially what I'm going to do is talk about a theorist, about their main works, and what those works say. This will save you from having to read every single piece that we've missed since the beginning of the semester. As you know, I have in fact changed the reading schedule. I've taken some reading out. I've made it a little bit lighter. We're moving a little slower. And that's for obvious reasons, not the least of which is that the publisher screwed up our book. But from what I understand, you can now get the book online through Amazon for $50 and you can rent it through June. So if you're looking for that cheaper temporary option, I believe that that is your best bet. And you can rent it through Kindle on Amazon. There are digital copies out there to be had. As for the Blackboard link to the book, I don't know where that is. I have asked them. I'm not really sure what they meant by that when they emailed me. I'm not positive that they know what they meant by that when they emailed me. So I guess that's not actually an option like I thought it was. But what is an option is to get the book rented for $50 on Amazon, and you'll have it through June, which you shouldn't need it any longer than that. And this is probably not one of those textbooks that most students would keep around anyway. If you want to make that kind of investment, feel free, but you do not have to for this course. One of your fellow students told me this today in another class that I teach, and I'm greatly appreciative, so you can thank her as well. All right, so how are we going to do this? Well, I am going to break down for you, assuming you have not read the first few readings that we have engaged. And I don't know how much more I'm going to tell you than I would normally tell you, assuming you have read, but there will be a slight difference in that I will be giving you more information from the reading than I normally would. So this is one of those classes that you have to read in order to pass, but that is not the case for this current video, or for the first 3 weeks of reading, apparently. So let's get started. Once I finish this video, I'm going to post a video about Plato, Aristotle, and another one about the ancient Greeks. And the purpose of doing that is, even though they're not going to be new lectures, they are from last semester, and they should be just as helpful. Nothing has changed with Plato and Aristotle in the last 6 to 12 months that I know of. So anyway, let's begin at the beginning. I told you on the first day that we define rhetoric the way that Aristotle does, as the art or skill of knowing, in any particular instance, all the means of persuasion. And all three of those parts are necessary to the definition of rhetoric. That's a good place to start, like I said before. So we're going to start there. Your book starts talking about a civic discourse. That is to say, the public discourse, or the kind of conversation that we're having in a particular culture, subculture, social order at any given time. Whether that be global all the way down to a public speaking showcase, for example. In all of those instances, Aristotle says that we should understand what persuasive elements are at work. And that does not just include who the speaker is, what the message is, who the audience is, and what the setting is, but should also include things like, what's the power situation that's occurring here at this time? What is the status of the people in relationship to the speaker, or the audience in relationship to a text, for example? So understanding all of those is important to understanding the grand scheme of things when it comes to Aristotelian rhetoric. Where does he get this from? Where does this come from? Well, one of the first works that we know of on rhetoric was a piece that was done by Gorgias. That's Gorgias. Gorgias. And some people pronounce it gorgeous for some reason, but I say Gorgias to keep it separate from the descriptive. But Gorgias wrote the Enchiridion on Helen. An encomium is more than just a eulogy. It's sort of a repositioning of the narrative of the person who has gone before us. It is defining what their legacy is going to be. So it's putting the person who is now gone, dead, into a place of presence here with us as the eulogy is delivered. So this encomium that he produces is for Helen, who is Helen of Troy, that Helen. So the lips that sank 1,000 ships, I believe, the most beautiful woman in the world, in history, and so on. And of course, who was stolen, I put it in air quotes, stolen by Paris from underneath the king. And that started the Trojan War. Now, Gorgias goes through a series of explanations for why Helen should not be blamed for starting the Trojan War. This is for our purposes, a very creative way for him to practice rhetoric, because if any of you know the story of Helen of Troy, we don't know how reflective of the truth it actually is or how realistic it is. We know it as a story from the ancient Greek epic poets. So this is sort of an exercise for him, really, in a way. So assuming that Helen has this bad reputation of having started the Trojan War, how should we remember her if not as being the start of a massively destructive war? Well, his answer to that is that Helen is not to blame for the war for a multitude of reasons, and therefore her memory should be different than perhaps the way we might think about her otherwise. He says, first of all, and this is going to sound incredibly condescending, and I apologize for that because that's the way he was writing, but he wrote that Helen could not be blamed because she was under the spell of love, and that's with a capital L. Because remember, during this time, they believed that every single emotion, idea, concept, philosophical concept, or otherwise, had sort of a god to it or a force to it. And so they were capitalized, these certain things like justice, peace, love, beauty, were capitalized because they were guided by a higher power. So in this case, love has taken her away from the king and to go with Paris. Another reason why she shouldn't be blamed is because she's a woman, and her mind was just too weak to withstand Paris's charms. Okay, I guess women are, I think, capable of making decisions, but again, it was a different time, and therefore she should not be blamed. Another reason is because he calls Paris silver-tongued, that he was so able to utilize persuasion that he talked her into leaving with him, even knowing it would start a war, because he was just that persuasive. Now, personally, Orlando Bloom, maybe your thing, maybe not. That's who played Paris in the movie, I believe, the one with Brad Pitt, maybe? I don't remember who all was in it, but yes, Paris was supposed to be an extremely attractive, very well-spoken prince who was able to woo Helen of Troy away from her husband. So, or away from the king, I should say. So, those are three of the main reasons why Helen should not be blamed. And he makes these arguments in a way that sort of tells you a story, at the same time making the argument that she should not be blamed for the war and should be seen in a better light. At the end of this work, he says, even if you're not persuaded that Helen should not be blamed for the war and her reputation should be tarnished, even if you don't buy his argument, he had a really good time writing it. So there is a part of the practice of rhetoric that is enjoyable. It's supposed to feel good. It's supposed to be, I don't know if the word is fun, but it should be enjoyable. That sounds crazy, I understand. But if you think about it in the following terms, some people really do enjoy having an audience in their hand and being able to persuade them that there's a moment when you can feel the audience sort of give themselves over to you, or at least some of the audience, where you know that you're reaching people with what you're saying, you know that they're agreeing with you. There are people who enjoy just the process of writing a speech or a work of any kind, that just the process of that is enjoyable. There are people who think that just the process of speaking is enjoyable. I liken it to playing sports. I know that my speech is going well when I feel really good about it. When I played softball, I knew when the ball came off of the bat whether it was a good hit or not by the feel of the hit of the ball, the contact between the ball and the bat, right? Like, you know exactly when you're quote unquote hitting it out of the park. And some people strive to do that through public presentation and public speech. I know the majority of people say that they're too afraid to speak. And I understand that as well. But as soon as some people get into speaking and feel how it feels, so to speak, they will find it enjoyable. And so this is the first time that we really get an understanding of rhetoric as an exercise that can be enjoyed, as well as teach us something or persuade people of something. In addition, this is the first mention of ethics that we get, where he says that Paris uses this silver tongue, these persuasion techniques to do something that's perhaps unsavory. So we get a consideration that we need to be careful when we practice rhetoric, that we don't lead our audience astray. So there's an ethical question of, are we using the rhetoric for good or for evil? And essentially, that is what I want you to get out of the encomium on Helen, is that there are arguments made for why Helen is in fact not to blame for the war, that there's an ethical component to rhetoric, and that rhetoric can be enjoyable, or the practice of it can be enjoyable at least, if not the study. Okay. Moving on from Gorgias, I believe the next one is Isocrates. And there's two works from Isocrates that I want to introduce you to. The first one is called Against the Sophists, and the second one is called Antidosis. They rhyme, Against the Sophists and Antidosis, I mean, kind of, sort of. So it's hopefully relatively easy for you to remember Isocrates' work. And again, this is Isocrates, Isocrates, not Socrates, but Isocrates. Isocrates lived really during the time of Plato more than anyone else. He was a sophist, Sophist. What is a sophist? A sophist is someone who practices rhetoric for their own benefit. One might say unethically, okay? They do it not for the purpose of sharing information or persuading or doing good for an audience, but for their own purposes. In the case of the sophists, it was to get money. And so what sophists normally are known as today are two different sort of careers: teachers, like myself, and lawyers. Because here's what happened. Back during the times when war was occurring in the ancient lands, people would take over. Like, let's say that you have the Athenians taking over Sparta, right, or whatever. Once the Athenians won, or once the Spartans won, what happened? Let's say the Athenians won. Did they get to take all the land in Sparta and live there in their houses that they overtook? Or did that land go back to the Trojans, who owned the land or owned their houses? And so there were these really small conflicts between individuals of, this is my house. No, I took it over. Now it's my house. I had it before the war. Yes, and I get it after the war. And so they would go to courts to have magistrates decide who should get the land and the house, the property. In that in those court situations, generally people would do one of two things. One, hire a rhetorician to speak on their behalf, like we do with lawyers. Or two, practice the art of rhetoric or learn rhetoric and have a rhetoric teacher, a sophist, teach you how to go in and argue for yourself for that particular situation. The sophists are generally get a bad name, but they're not really that bad, to be honest with you. I mean, there's a lot of people who make money off of what we might consider unethical choices. But Isocrates was one of them. And so supposedly he made a ton of money off of these people that he taught and these people that he practiced for. And that was true to a certain extent. However, he then decided that he did not believe that the sophists were practicing rhetoric in a way that was good for rhetoric. So he opened up his own school where he taught rhetoric, not sophistry. And in doing so, he put his efforts and his resources into his school so that people could become better citizens, because he believed that that would be how to have the best immortality, was to teach people to be better citizens. And he believed that wholeheartedly. So why did he write against the sophists? It's just like it sounds. He made all the arguments for why sophists were not good. And essentially he said that they teach unethically because they promise to teach you the practice of rhetoric, but all they do is teach you how to get out of one particular situation, and that's it. They don't actually teach you all of the persuasive elements, or they don't teach you how to do this in a second situation. So you would have somebody represent you, or you would be taught how to represent yourself. And then if you had to go back to court a second time, you would have to go through it all over again. And he found this, Isocrates found this to be a waste of money. Now, some of you might recognize that that's sort of what we do with lawyers today, right? Like, if I need to go to court for something and then I need to go to court for another thing, I have to pay a second fee, right? So he thought that was a really bad practice of rhetoric. He didn't think it was ethical. He felt that it removed what good the practice of rhetoric could do, which is to make good citizens. And so he wrote this piece to explain that particular argument for why sophists were not to be trusted, why they were not good for democracy, and why they were unethical, and charging the outrageous amount of money that they did in order to teach people, but not to teach them fully or properly, was his biggest complaint in against the sophists. Antidosis is a separate work that we have by Isocrates, and antidosis literally comes from antidote, meaning not anecdote like a story, but antidote, like as in to a poison, and something that you might inject before, like a vaccine that you might inject beforehand, or to cure a particular poison. In this case, he's talking about a poisonous argument. Back in those days, they believed that people should buy ships or monuments or build libraries or buildings or something like that before they died. So that after they died, there was something there to remind people that they were there. And Isocrates was not going to do that. He said, I am not building a warship. I am not donating money or having a statue made or anything like that. Because he said, first of all, I have not made as much money as you think I have, because he did not charge sophist prices for his education. Secondly, the money he did make, he put back into his school so that he could produce better citizens, so that they could actually do some good for democracy and do some good as citizens in the world, rather than just get them through one problem or another. Third, he did not feel that a monument or a warship or anything like that is a real way to immortality. Rather, teaching the future generations to teach each other how to practice rhetoric to move through society, to have a functional and productive democracy, that was more important than building something material that would just crumble anyway. And so he really needed to defend himself from these people who were attacking him by saying, hey, look, you should be giving money back to us. And he's trying to explain that he's already done that. So antidosis is sort of this, it's not an apology, it's a defense from an attack to say, hey, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing as a citizen. Okay, so there we have 3 pieces for you. The Encomium on Helen, which talks about how we can tell stories to rememorialize or to memorialize individuals who have gone on before us. So we're praising them in some way. So we know that rhetoric can be used for praise. We know that in Against the Sophists, that Isocrates explains why the sophists are bad. So we know that rhetoric can be used to accuse as well as praise. And in Antidosis, we have Isocrates defending himself from attacks about his character. And so rhetoric can also be used for defense. So we have sort of this praise, attacking, and defending as our first 3 examples of rhetoric and the first 3 examinations of rhetoric as a practice. See, I saved you a lot of reading. Actually, not that much, to be honest with you, because the reading actually, they're relatively short. However, you don't have to try to, grab your way through them. I mean, they can be really onerous if it's your first time reading this particular version of the English language. So the next video that is going to go up is going to be on Plato. And then I'll put up one on Aristotle and eventually on the classical Romans, Cicero and Cicero and Quintilian. Sorry, I blanked there for a second. What I want you to do is you do not need to go back and read Isocrates and the other guy. Wow, Gorgias, it's late in the day, I apologize. You don't need to go back and read those. I would, however, look through, actually you don't need to read Plato either. I think I described that pretty well in the video. Where I want you to start reading is going to be with Aristotle. That is going to be, in my opinion, the first place and most important place for you to start reading closely. Okay, I hope this helps you. I hope you know that we'll make it through this semester. It's going to be okay. I'm glad to get rolling, to be honest with you. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, etc., please feel free to email me. I have been pretty good about getting back to emails this week and last week, but if I've missed you, let me know. And also, I will go back onto Blackboard, obviously, and answer your questions on the discussion board if there are any. All right, everybody, happy reading and listening, I guess. I'll talk to you soon.